אני קהלת, הייתי מלך על ישראל בירושלים, ונתתי את ליבי לדרוש ולתור בחוכמה על כל אשר נעשה תחת השמיים הוא עניין רע נתן אלוהים לבני האדם לענות בו. ראיתי את כל המעשים שנעשו תחת השמש, והנה הכל הבל ורעות רוח.
Shalom, my dear friends. Shalom from the holy city of Jerusalem. Today, the 22nd day of the month of Mar Cheshvan, the 20th of November of the year 2019. And today, we are studying in our series on Kohelet, the scroll of Ecclesiastes, starting from the second section of the work, namely from chapter 1, verse 12, and we'll be looking today at the entire section from chapter 1, verse 12, until the end of chapter 2, which constitutes a single section on its own. In our first session, we looked at the opening verses of Kohelet, the opening words of King Solomon, chapter 1, from verse 1 through the end of verse 11, where Shlomo gives us the overall view of his work. Everything is this hevel, this vanity, and he cites the unending cycles of the sun around the earth day after day, and the unending cycling of the waters from the rivers to the oceans, from the oceans to the sources of the rivers, and it's all an ever-ending cycle, and all of this is under the sun, and what is the point of it? And now, in our second section, we looked at a wider picture of the context of King Solomon's life and his times and the place of Kohelet in the canon. So today we continue in our study of the text of Kohelet, the Hebrew text, and I'll be looking at it with you in the light of the ancient commentary of Yonatan ben Uziel, written in the language of Aramaic at the beginning of the Common Era. Rabbi Yonatan ben Uziel is considered by the Talmud to have been the leading student of Hillel, and he was gifted with prophetic spirit and translated the Tanakh into the vernacular of the time, the Aramaic language. Aramaic had been the language of the entire Fertile Crescent and was, from the earliest times, was the language of Abraham, of Lot, of Lavan and their successors. And Bilam tells us he was taken from the land of Aram. And the ancient Aramaic language in its different forms was the vernacular in the later biblical times, in the times of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and the time of Cyrus, king of Persia, and Darius. We see that Aramaic was the lingua franca of the whole area for official and diplomatic purposes, and indeed the Aramaic language survives until today in the dialects of certain of the Jewish communities that came from Kurdistan, and they there are some relics of those communities that until today do understand the Aramaic language. And what is important to us in the Targum of Rabbi Yonatan ben Uziel is that where necessary, he in explaining the text to his audiences of speakers of Aramaic across the world, where there were communities of exiled Jews from Babylon in the east to and further east into the hinterland of Asia, and all the way across to the west, across Italy, France, Germany. Aramaic was a language understood by all, and Yonatan ben Uziel, in the style of the true darshan, the true preacher who is explaining and setting forth the intent of the original to his audience, Yonatan ben Uziel gives us in certain key locations, as we shall be seeing today, very great insight into the text, as do the other classical commentators, Rashi and the Metzudat David, which are the two main commentaries upon which I am relying. So today we turn to Kohelet chapter 1, verse 12, through to the end of chapter 2, verse 26, with the help of God, where after the introductory 11 verses of the scroll of Kohelet, now Shlomo returns to, first of all, explaining who he is or who he was, as we shall see, and then going into his achievements in two main realms. The one in the pursuit of wisdom and the fathoming the wisdom of creation and the wisdom of the Creator in the Torah, and secondly, his pursuit of happiness through the abundance of his wealth and his material projects, the pleasure projects that he sponsored, and that after all of this, he's reflecting and pondering in what may on the surface seem a very cynical summing up of the uselessness and valueless of everything, because whether righteous or unrighteous, everybody ends up in the grave, and it seems to be all one. But what we shall see with the help of the Targum of Yonatan ben Uziel and the comments of Rashi on our section is that in fact what may on the surface be seemingly very cynical statements in fact allude to very profound wisdom, the wisdom of Torah, the entry to which is based upon emunah, upon faith. And we shall see how our commentators amplify and help us to understand the meaning of these statements. So in this section, it's all essentially one extended discourse from the beginning of chapter 1, verse 12, until the end of chapter 2, with the break where the traditional chapter division of the Bible puts the break at the beginning of chapter 2, where Shlomo goes from the subject of his pursuit of wisdom into a detailed account of his life projects and life achievements. And after that, towards the later part of chapter 2, he ponders on the meaning of all that. And then in our next session, we should be looking at chapter 3, beginning with the very beautiful and evocative series of the 28 different times that we may experience in our existence. And from that point on in the book, much of it is mashalim, statements of teachings, of reproof, of wisdom that follow sometimes in series of several verses around a theme, sometimes in a seemingly separate concept in a verse on its own, and we shall be looking at all that way down the line. But for today, let us take a look at Kohelet chapter 1 from verse 12 on, which seems to go back to the opening of the whole Megillah. Ani Kohelet hayiti melech al Yisrael b'Yerushalayim. Well, I was king over Israel in Jerusalem. Well, this particular verse is the subject of interesting interpretations by our sages based upon allusions in the text, and we need to understand that there are tremendously subtle hints in our text as to what is going on, and here particularly the interesting verb "I was" coming after the opening words of the scroll. These are the words of Kohelet. All of a sudden he was king over Israel in Jerusalem. Well, first of all, let us hear what our sages teach in the Talmud in Sanhedrin. That is on Daf Chof, page 20, on the B side of the page. It says that in the name of Rabbi Oniah, that King Solomon saw 3 worlds in his lifetime. First of all, he was a hediot, that is to say, a private individual. Then he became king. And then he went back to being a private individual. He started off as a simple individual, then he became wise, ended up simple. He started off poor, he became tremendously wealthy, he went back to being poor. And for what reason does he say, as in our verse here, the verse 12, the opening verse of the new section, I am Kohelet, I was king over Israel in Jerusalem? He is coming to tell us I was what I was, but right now I'm no longer anything. When an angel came down with the outer appearance of Solomon and sat on his throne, and that's the idea that we touched on in the life of Solomon, the concept of the demon of Asmodeus. When this angel in the guise of Solomon sat on his throne, Solomon himself was going from door to door, and to the synagogues and to the study halls and to the house of the great people of Israel, saying, well, I am Kohelet, I was king over Jerusalem, and now what am I? Well, let us look at the Targum Yonatan on this verse. I'm passing over your screens the texts of either the Nach or the commentaries we're looking at. And here, the Targum Yonatan, an opening verse of our study today, verse 12 of chapter 1, when Solomon was king, he was sitting on his throne, the throne of his kingship, and his heart became haughty, exceptionally haughty on account of his wealth, and he transgressed the decree of the word of God, and he assembled many horses and chariots and horse riders, and he gathered and stored up silver and gold to exceptional levels, and he began to make marriage alliances with the surrounding pagan nations. Immediately the anger of the Lord came down upon him and sent to him Ashmedai, the king of the demons, who drove him from his throne of kingship and took the ring from Solomon's hand in order that he would be wandering around in exile through the world in order to chastise him. And King Solomon was going around the provinces and the cities of the promises of the cities of the provinces of the land of Israel, crying and complaining and saying, I am Kohelet, that my name was Solomon, my name was called Solomon before this, and I was king over Israel in Jerusalem. Now, turning to the commentary of Rashi on this verse, Rashi again gives us a similar point of view, expanded just a little. Ani Kohelet hoyisi melech, I was the king al kol ha'olam, over the whole universe. As we hear that Solomon had rule over the trees and the plants and the animals and the birds, then at the end it was only over Israel, and at the end it was only over Jerusalem alone, and at the end he had nothing except his stick, his staff. For he says, I was king in Jerusalem, but that is to suggest now I am not the king. Well, it's with this that Solomon now introduces his discourse in chapter 1, going on now from verse 13. נוסעתי es ליבי לדרוש ולסול בחוכמו על כל אשר נעשו תחת השמיים. הוא עניין רו נוסן אלוהים לבני האדם לענוס בוי. I put my heart to search out and to examine this chokhmah with respect to everything that is done under the heaven. Again and again, this phrase, under the heavens, namely, as we shall see by our commentators, in the material world. And this is a bad occupation, a bad business that God has given to the sons of men to be tormented with. So here our Targum again slightly amplifies, telling us, I gave over my heart to search out teaching, understanding from before the Lord at the time when he was revealed to me in Gibeon, as recounted in first book of Kings, in order to search out and to investigate all that I might desire from him, in order that I could ask from him, from the Lord, everything that I might desire. And I did not ask from him anything except wisdom, to understand the difference between good and evil, to understand folly, to understand everything that is done under the sun in this world. Here, Targum amplifying for us, once again, the intent of Solomon's words. When he uses the phrase under the sun, he's referring to the material world. And again, in the ensuing words, Targum amplifies, I saw all of the deeds of the sons of men, the sinners. I saw the bad matter that God has given to the people to suffer with. Well, now Rashi puts a finer point on what Solomon was searching out. In Rashi's comment on verse 13, I gave my heart to search out Batorah, Hi Achochmah. It was through the plumbing of the depths of the wisdom of the Torah that Solomon sought his understanding. It was through the Torah that Solomon would contemplate all the evil that was mentioned earlier, namely that which is done under the sun. And continues Solomon, I set my powers of understanding upon the Torah to understand this, what is it that occupies this evil occupation that God has given, the Holy One, blessed be, He has given before the sons of men, where he challenges in the Torah, as we find in the book of Deuteronomy. Moses says he's giving us the choice between life and good, death and evil. So here Rashi is helping us to understand that King Solomon is explaining to us the mystery of freedom of will, that God, this is the main thing he wanted to understand. What are the aspects of good and what are the aspects of evil that God has given to humanity to have to choose and grapple between? Because this inyan ra, this evil matter, this is the evil customs that the wicked have, and God has given the wicked all of given humanity all of these challenges to choose between good and evil. Now, looking at verse 14 of our text, King Solomon tells us, "Ro'isi es kol ha'masim shena'asu tachas hashemesh v'nei hakol Hevel ureus ruach. I saw all of the deeds that are done under the heavens, and all this wicked torment of the spirit. It's all Hevel, going back again to this concept of the vanity with which he opened the work. So everything King Solomon is saying is set up to break people's spirit. The Hebrew expression at the end of this verse, re'us ruach, Rashi explains to us that it's from the root. That means to break. It all comes to break people's spirit. And then he says, King Solomon in verse 15, a widely quoted verse, me'ovas lo yuchal liskoin v'chesroin lo yuchal lihimonois. It's something twisted and corrupted that cannot be repaired. There is a lack that simply cannot be accounted for. You cannot get to the bottom of it and repair it. Well, now Targum takes us to deeper levels of understanding of what King Solomon is alluding to here in verse 15. He says, the people that their path, a person whose path is perverted in this world and who dies unrepentant in those sins, he does not return in teshuvah, in repentance, he is not given the power to be rectified after his death. And a person that is lacking in Torah and in its commandments in his lifetime, after his death, he does not have the opportunity to be counted with the tzaddikim, the righteous, in the garden of evil. Well, Rashi summarizes the intent here with his comment on this verse, me'uvas b'chayor, of something that was twisted in the person's life. Lo yuchal liskon mishemeis, he will not be able to rectify after his death. And Rashi quotes the saying of our rabbis, mishetorach be'erev Shabbos yochel b'Shabbos, only the righteous who toil on the eve of the Shabbat, alluding to the world to come, will be able to eat the reward on the Shabbat. And our rabbis interpreted the verse in relation to another thing that cannot be rectified. So a person that comes upon, has intimate relations with a woman that is forbidden to him under the incest laws of the Torah. If that person causes this woman to give birth, the issue of a union between two people whose intimacy is forbidden under the Torah laws of Gilui Arayot, of the incest laws, that individual born of this union is called a mamzer, one who is not permitted into the kahal, into the community. So here is a baby that is alive and living and will presumably advance, and the mamzer, whoever he or she marries, any issue from them will also be a mamzer until the end of all the generations. There is no way that the mamzer himself or herself can stop ever being a mamzer. And another interpretation of example of that which cannot be rectified would be a Torah scholar, a Talmid Chacham, who separates himself from the Torah, who leaves observance of the Torah. Somebody who was straight at the outset, but he got twisted. And that which is lacking and cannot be counted would refer to somebody who has removed himself from the quorum of the righteous, of the pure, and he cannot be counted with them when the time will come for them to return to receive their eternal reward. Well, now, moving on in our Hebrew text, King Solomon, after these statements about the impossibility of correcting after death that which was left crooked in life, דיברתי אני עם ליבי לאמר אני הנה הגדלתי והוספתי חוכמו על כל אשר היו לפני על ירושלים וליבי רוא הרבה חוכמה ודעת. So I said to myself in my heart, here I have magnified and added wisdom over and above all that were before me, ruling over Jerusalem, and my heart has seen very great wisdom. And here King Solomon is beginning to explain the ultimate levels of wisdom that he did attain. And I gave my heart, he continues, "Eteno libilodas chochmo vodas hoilelois vesichlus yodati shegam zehu ra'ayon ruach." I gave my heart, says King Solomon, as we heard, with that dream that he had and his request to God, I gave my whole heart to know and understand chokhmah, and also to attain das hoilelus. Hoilelus is translated into the Aramaic Targum as holchalto de malchuso, the abyss of the rule, the kingship, the malchut, the abyss of it. And Professor Jastrow, in his Aramaic English dictionary, explains that the word given there in the Targum, holchalto, would refer to the endless intrigue and subtle corruption that exists in all the realms of government, and this would apply also on the metaphysical level in the realms of the klipa, the realms of the sitra achra of evil. Sichlus also is a word that has something of the root of sechel, wisdom, and something of the root of sichlus, of folly. We shall see what our commentators make of this. Rashi tells us that sichlus here is shtus, folly. And Rashi explains to us that King Solomon's intent here, after his great pursuit of wisdom, is that I gave my heart to know what is the real nature of wisdom? Where does it all lead to? What is the nature of this holeloit, this folly, this madness that is exemplified in the conduct of this world? And sichlut, Rashi, explaining the word holelut, explains shamum, boredom, dullness, tiruf adas, the complete madness, the one's thoughts, when it has no control of one's mind. The expression here of holelu is one of the things that are mixed up, like we have in the Mishnah, machul b'mayim, a wine that is mixed with water, and sichlus, explains Rashi, that is shtus, folly, foolishness. So now Rashi explains more on the intent of this verse. Yodati ato shegam hachokma yesh bo shever ruach. And now I know that wisdom itself can also lead to the breaking of the spirit. When a person has too much wisdom and sophistication, he relies upon his own wisdom and sophistication. This is a thought that is echoed by Rabbi Nachman, particularly in his teaching in Likutei Moharan, Part 2, Torah 12, Ayet Mokom Kavodo, where is the place of God's glory, where he explains how far astray people can go with excessive wisdom and sophistication. And the person relying on his own great wisdom does not keep away from that which is forbidden. And great anger is drawn this way to God Almighty. Continues Rashi explaining what Solomon had said to himself, I will multiply horses, and I won't take the people back to Egypt, which is what Deuteronomy says the king may not do. And in the end, he took them back to Egypt. He brought his Egyptian wife, and she influenced what was going on in Jerusalem. I said, I will have more and more wives, and they won't turn my heart away from God. And exactly that happened. It's written over me in the Tanakh and Book of Kings. His wives turned astray his heart. And likewise, he says that he relied upon his abundant wisdom, and he did several things that he speaks about in allegorical form in the closing chapters of the book of Proverbs. In the verse says, the man, le'isi el ve'uchal, says, well, these are the man who says, well, God is with me, God is with me, I'll be able to, and he won't be able to. So now, in this, until now, in our section of study today, we are seeing how King Solomon has come to the very end of wisdom. He is not able anymore to to go further. He's gone to the very ultimate. And so now, at the chapter break from the end of the closing words of chapter 1, Solomon sums up why the pursuit of wisdom is ultimately leads a person to this broken spirit and the pursuit of wind. Looking at verse 18, he says, Ki b'rov chochmo, rov kas, v'yosiv das, yosiv machov. Through the abundance of wisdom there comes about an abundance of anger, and he who gains more understanding actually gains more pain. Well, this certainly has a very important meaning to all of us on the level of pshat. There is inevitably a pain that comes from more and more wisdom and understanding of what actually goes on in this world as the wheel turns, and there's birth, growth, maturity, life and death, and all of the other cycles. And King Solomon is telling us that too much wisdom also can lead to this breakage. And so now, going on past the chapter break from the end of chapter 1 to the end of chapter 2, King Solomon says, okay, well, I've tried all that, been there, done that. And he goes on to say, Omarti ani belibi, I said in my heart, Lechono anascho v'simcho, urei v'tov, v'nei gam hu hovel. Going off on a new tack, Solomon, after all that pursuit of wisdom leading only to pain, he says, well, let's go and let me pour out libations of joy. This phrase, anascho v'simcho, nesech is the Hebrew root that is used of the libations of wine, pouring out the joy. Let's enjoy life and see good. And King Solomon says, summarizing what will be his conclusion after the account coming now in the coming verses of his achievements. It all ends up again Hevel. So Rashi, explaining this first verse of chapter 2, presents it to us as follows. Omarti ani belibi ho'il v'cheinu, if the above is true, that wisdom leads only to pain and sorrow, echtal li min ha'chochma, will refrain from wisdom, esog b'mishte tomid, I'll just enjoy drinking. Anascho, explains Rashi, the verb in the text is an expression having the connotation of mixing wine with water to drink it, and the strong, sweet wines of the land of Israel required the addition of some pure, clean water, the drops of wisdom, to mitigate the strong taste of the wine. And now, says Solomon, let's go and enjoy the good life. V'hinei gam hu hevel she'ari ro'is b'nevuah she'harbe kilkulim bo'em metoch schok. Because I saw in prophecy that much damage comes about through merriment, through lightheartedness. Belshazzar meis mitoch mishte. Belshazzar, the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, who had destroyed the temple, Belshazzar was attacked by the forces of Darius the Mede and Cyrus of Persia, and Babylon was conquered when Belshazzar was in a drunken feast. The people of the generation of the flood, according to our Midrash, based on verses in Book of Job and other sources, they were swept away out of a life of an abundance of goodness that God bestowed upon them. And King Solomon, going on now to chapter 2, verse 2 in the Hebrew text, King Solomon tells us, L'schok omarti mahoilol, u'lesimcho ma zois oiso. I said of merriment, that is wildness, of simcha, of happiness and joy. I said, what does that accomplish? Well, we already saw in our second section, we looked at the Talmud in Tractate Shabbos, showing some of the contradictions, the apparent contradictions in the text of Kohelet that led some of the sages to want to put it aside and not include it in the canon. Here we see one of them, King Solomon, saying, what does Simcha accomplish? Whereas later on we shall hear Solomon saying, actually, that is what we should be trying to accomplish, holy Simcha. So King Solomon now explains about his tour into the realm of physical gratification. Verse 3 of chapter 2, Tarti velibi limshoch bayayin, espesori velibi noeg bechochmo v'le'achoz besichlus, an asher er'eh איזה טוב לבני האדם אשר יעשו תחת השמיים מספר ימי חייהם. Someone goes on this tour and exploration in his heart to draw himself after wine, to draw his flesh through wine, and yet he wants to accomplish the maintenance of his wisdom and his detached, objective eye, watching himself. In his heart of hearts, he will continue to practice a life of wisdom, while at the same time holding by madness and investigating it in order to discover what is good for the children of men to do under the heavens in the number of the days of their lives. So here King Solomon is really sacrificing himself for the sake of mankind to, it's somewhat reminiscent of one of those Greek heroes who wanted to pass through the straits where the sirens could be heard singing, and the only way to do it so that he wouldn't be able to get diverted by them was to have himself tied to the mast of the ship, and he plied all of his sailors with wine, and they were all asleep from drunkenness, and the boat sailed through the straits, and he heard the voice of the sirens, and the sailors and he couldn't move and do anything with the boat because he was tied to the mast, and the sailors were asleep, and only when they woke up did they take back control of the boat, and that way he heard the sirens. Here King Solomon wanted to do the same thing. He wanted to go into the madness while holding on to wisdom, somewhat like Rabbi Nachman in Likutei Moharan, part 1, chapter 64, saying that the great tzaddik alone is permitted to go into the depths of the Chalal Panui, the vacated space, in order to investigate its roots, which are indeed the roots of madness and laughter and mockery. So from this point on, in this section, Solomon begins to evoke the amazing things that he did in his time in Jerusalem, which really must have made Jerusalem the absolute wonder of the world. And in the coming sessions, when he's going to start telling us about what he did, there is very extensive Targum on verse 4. Hirdalti ma'asai bonisli botim notatili keromim. Here on verse 4 of chapter 2, the Targum tells us, I multiplied good deeds in Jerusalem. I built houses for myself. I built the holy temple to atone for Israel. And I built literally the cooling house of the king. This is a structure that is described in the book of Kings after the account of the building of the temple. And I made an idron is literally a place where the wheat is threshed, but it's the place where the Sanhedrin are seated. I hewed out the hewn stone chamber for the sages of the Sanhedrin, and a hall for the court of law, all of hewn stones, and there sit the sages, the judges, who are judging the laws justly. I made a throne of ivory of elephants as a throne of kingship, and I planted for myself vineyards in Yavne. These vineyards of for grapes that I and the rabbis of the Sanhedrin might drink from them, and also to pour out libations of new wine and old wine upon the altar. And going on, let's look at the Hebrew text of verse 5 as we see how the Targum expands and enriches our understanding of the verse. I made for myself gardens and orchards. I planted trees of every fruit. Verse 5, continues, turning now to Targum. I made irrigated gardens and orchards, and I planted there all kinds of herbs, some of them for the purpose of consumption as food, some of them for drink, some of them for medications and healing, all kinds of fragrant herbs. And standing in them were other trees, not fruit-bearing trees, all kinds of trees with fragrant odors that the demons and the the harmful spirits would bring to me from India, and out of all of these that made fruits, I put them all the way from the boundary of the wall of the city of Jerusalem all the way down to the cave of the waters of the Shiloach, known today as the Siloam, the spring from which the pure waters were drawn for temple purposes. And continuing now, we'll read several verses from the Hebrew and then go back to this very beautiful Targum. Verse 6, Osisili berichos maim lehashkois mehem yar tzomech eitzim. I made these pools of water to irrigate from them the forest which would sprout with trees. Konisi avodim ushfochois uvenei vayis hoyoli gam mikna vokor uvetzoin harbe hoyoli mikol shoyu lefonai b'Yerushalayim. I acquired manservants and maidservants and members of my household I had, and also cattle. I had oxen and sheep in many of them, and more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. He continues, Konasti ligam kesef v'zohov skolas melochim v'hamedinois osisilis shorim v'shorois v'sanugos b'nei ha'odam shido v'shidois. I gathered in silver and gold and the treasures of kings and of the different countries and provinces, and I made for myself sharim v'sharois. Literally, the sharim is a male form of people that are singing, and sharois the female form. V'sanugos b'nei ha'odam, other pleasures of the sons of men, shido v'shidois. We shall see what these rather unusual words mean when we come to the Targum and to the other commentators. Just concluding now King Solomon's account of his days of grandeur and glory. Godalti v'hasafti mikol shoyo lefonai b'Yerushalayim af chochmosi omnoli. I was greater and I added more than all that were before me in Jerusalem, and indeed my wisdom stood for me. Well, we shall be looking shortly at these verses in more detail in the Targum, but just to conclude this section before Solomon starts reaching his conclusions about all that he tried to accomplish. V'chol asher sho'alu einai רצלתי מהם, למונעתי את ליבי מכל שמחו, כי ליבי סומך מכל עמולי, וזה היה חלקי מכל עמולי. Everything that my eyes asked, I did not withhold from them. I did not keep back my heart from any joy or happiness, for my heart was happy with all of my labor, and that was my share from my labor. But after that, he starts to ask, what did it all lead to? For nisi ani b'chol ma'asai she'osu yodai, I turned from all my deeds that my hands did. Ve'omol she'omalti la'asai, all the labor with which I labored to accomplish. Ve'hinei kol hevel, but it's all vanity, all re'us ruach, the breaking of the spirit. Ve'ein yisroin tachas ha'shemesh, there's no benefit under the sun. But we shall see in the verses that follow this that King Solomon is going to explain why all this is vanity. But for the moment, let's look back in Targum, going back to how Targum explains these evocations of Solomon's greatness. I acquired servants and maidservants. This is Targum on verse 7. I acquired male servants and female servants from the sons of the children of Ham, the third son of Noah, and from the other pagan nations. And I set up treasurers who were appointed over the sustenance of my house. and they provided my livelihood for me and the men of my house through the 12 months of the year, and one extra parnas, one extra officer appointed over the king's livelihood in a month of a leap year, when there was a 13th month added. All of this is brought out in First Book of Kings in the early chapters, giving an account of the officers of Solomon who brought his livelihood. And likewise, I acquired oxen and sheep, more than any that had been previous to me in Jerusalem. Continuing with verse 8, I also gathered in treasures of silver and gold, and even the weights and the measures and the scales, the just measures that were used in commerce in Jerusalem and in the kingdom, I made them of good gold, and the officers of kings and the provinces would be bringing to me taxes, and out of them I was able to make for the temple various kinds of instruments of music for the Levites to play over the sacrifices. There were stringed instruments and wind instruments for to play with them for the singers, the male singers and the female singers. Also in the banqueting halls where wine was being spread with all of the enticing delicacies that people love, and there were public halls and bathhouses with pipes that would flow with cold water and pipes that would flow with hot water. These were the civic luxuries that King Solomon introduced into his kingdom long before there were the baths of ancient Greece and ancient Rome that people have made so famous. Here he had hot and cold running water. So here is Targum's explanation of this expression in the verse 8 that he made shadim and shadois. Well, there are other interpretations of these words in the Hebrew text, and one of them is that he actually had under his control the male demons and the female demons. All of this is midrash. Going on to what Solomon says about his achievements, I multiplied goodness and wealth more than all who had lived before me in Jerusalem, but all the time my wisdom stood for me and was a help to me. On this particular verse, let's turn quickly to the Hebrew text. On this particular verse, our sages said, I added greatly to my, I was greater, added more than all before me in Jerusalem, af chochmosi omdoli. Indeed, my wisdom stood for me. The Hebrew particle af, indeed, also signifies anger. The word af is literally the nose, and when people get angry, they start huffing and puffing through their nose. And our sages said that King Solomon's wisdom was acquired through great exertion. He says, the wisdom that I acquired through af, through exertion, that is the wisdom that stood for me. It's the wisdom that a person gains through harsh experience that endures with him. And so he continues about all the things that his eyes requested, all of the pleasures that he made for himself and for Jerusalem and his people. And going now to verse 10, where the Hebrew text says, everything that my eyes asked, I did not withhold from them. Targum explains this verse in a very beautiful way, consistent with the imagery of King Solomon's earlier work, which is Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. In Targum on Kohelet, verse 10, he says, everything that the rabbis of the Sanhedrin asked of me, whether it was to give a ruling about something to purify it or to rule it impure, to rule a person to be innocent or guilty. I never held back from them the full explanation of the matter, and I never withheld my heart from all of the joy of the Torah, because I had the opportunity that my heart could rejoice in the wisdom that was given to me from before the Lord more than all other people, and I rejoiced in it more than all of my toil. And that rejoicing, that was my good share that was given to me to receive as my complete reward in the world to come, the reward of the goodness of the wisdom. But then he turns in verse 11 to a different tack, and he's going to start explaining to us why it was everything accomplished in his reign would seem to be futile. In verse 11, I turned from all my works that my hands did, all my toil, and I saw that it's all vanity and all breaking of the spirit. There's no benefit of anything under the sun. And to continue with a few more verses in the Hebrew text, I turned my heart to examine wisdom and the depths of wildness and folly, for what is the man that will come after the king with regard to what he has already done? This is one of the typically extremely opaque and hard to comprehend verses of Kohelet. And what exactly is he teaching us here? Let's look for guidance through verse 11. I started looking at all the works that my hands made and all my labor that I labored to do, and it's all vanity and the breaking of the spirit. There's no benefit under the sun in this world except where I have a good reward in completion for any good that I may have done to receive in the world to come. And continuing, he says, I looked to examine the wisdom and the subtlety and intrigue of the kingship and folly, because what benefit does a person have praying after the decree of the king and after punishments that may have been decreed, because the decree has already been decreed against him and will be executed against him? That is to say, here, this seemingly impenetrable verse, going back now to the Hebrew, verse 12, I turn my heart to examine wisdom and folly, for who or what is the person that will come after the king? The king here is alluding on the surface apparently to King Solomon. If I went this far, who could do more than me? But according to the allusion in the text, the king is God. Who can come to rectify matters after the king, namely God, has already decreed? And now Solomon says, yes, indeed, verse 13, I saw there is a benefit to wisdom over and above folly, like the benefit of light more than darkness. So there is necessarily a benefit that does come from wisdom. We must not fall into cynicism and say, well, it's all a complete waste. Looking into verse 14 and onwards before we go back into the commentators, the wise person, his eyes are in his head. He's wide open, looking ahead, seeing what is coming. That is the definition in Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers. Mi chacham horoya es hanoilod. Who is wise? One who sees what's going to be born, what's going to develop, what's going to come out of one direction or another. If you go further to the end of it, the wise person, his eyes are in his head. The fool goes in darkness, and I knew that one event is going to happen to them all. So the question in the coming verses, if we're all going to die, what is the difference between the wise man and the fool being one who has fallen into sin? So going to Targum on these verses, verse 12, I looked to investigate wisdom and folly, and what benefit is there of a person to pray after the king has already made the decree? It's already going to be executed. Verse 13, and I saw with the Holy Spirit that there is a benefit to wisdom over and above folly, and the wisdom is like the benefit and the advantage of the light of day over the darkness of night. Because the wise man, verse 14, looks with his head at what is coming, what's going to be at the end, and he already prays and nullifies from the outset the bad decree from the world, whereas the fool goes in darkness. And now I indeed know that if the wise man will not pray and in advance nullify the bad decree from the world, when the punishments will come into the world, one plague, one punishment will actually occur to everyone. And so King Solomon here is saying that one of the advantages of true wisdom, where a person understands where it's going, is that the wise tzaddik may pray in advance to rectify the decree, because if he doesn't, everybody's going to suffer. And continuing now, verse 15, as often the Targum on this verse sees Solomon in his historical perspective, where in verse 15 he says, I said, just like what happened to the fool, it will happen to me. Why, therefore, did I go so far in wisdom? Targum says, I said in my heart, what happened to Saul, the son of Kish, the first king of Israel, who went astray with his folly, and he did not observe the instruction that he was given to destroy Amalek. He wanted to spear the Amalekite king Agag against the explicit instructions of God through the prophet Samuel. Isnatlas minei malchusa, the kingdom was taken from him. King Solomon says, that is likely to happen to me. Me too, this will happen. So why did I get so wise more than anybody else? And I said, this too is vanity. This is none other than the decree of God. And now going into this further contemplation of the difference between the wise and the foolish. Looking now to verse 16, another of the opaque verses of Kohelet. Ki ein zichron lechochom im aksil la'olam, b'shekavor hayom emabo im akol nishkoch, ve'eich yomos echochom im aksil. There's going to be no memory of the wise man with the fool forever. When the days that are to come arrive, everything will be forgotten. How could it be that the sage and the fool will both die? This appears to be, on the surface, extremely cynical, that it's going to happen to everybody, so what difference is there? And this leads King Solomon, verse 17, Sonesias achayim, I hated life. The whole business being done under the heavens, it's under the sun, it's bad in my eyes. Hakol ruach, hakol hevel rus ruach, it's all this vanity and breaking of the spirit, again and again returning to these same themes, because indeed sometimes looking at the world, it does drive us to depression and despair. And here's Solomon as he will begin to evoke what happened. So nisi ani es kol amoli shani omar תחת השמש אני חנה לאדם שיהיה אחרוי. Says Solomon, I hated all my labor that I was laboring under the sun for my worldly achievements, and all that's going to happen, I'm going to leave it to the person that will be after me. And here King Solomon begins to amplify a thought that he gave us at the outset of the book, Solomon seeing with Holy Spirit that his son Rechavam, who would become king, would squander the resources and would provoke the rebellion of the northern kingdom under the tribe of Ephraim with the 10 tribes of Israel and the split in the kingdom. So King Solomon is saying, well, who knows if the person after me will be wise or not? Do I know? Will he be wise, foolish? And he's going to have control over all of my labors that I labor and all the wisdom that I accomplished under the sun. It's all vanity. So to go back over the commentary on some of these last verses that we've been looking at in the text, looking at now at the Targum on this very critical verse 16. For there is no recollection for the wise person with the fool in the world to come. That is to say, they are not remembered and thought about in the same place. And the reason is, after the death of the person, that which was already in his days, when the days that are to come after that, when they arrive, everything will be forgotten. And if so, how could people say that the end of the righteous and the end of the wicked, the guilty, is one and the same thing? So here, Targum is helping us to see that Solomon here is not being cynical, but if you'll penetrate under the words of the text, he is separating the wise man from the fool. Going back to the Hebrew text, Targum is pointing out on verse 16 that in the world of truth, there's no remembering of the wise man together with the wicked. They go to two different places because all that was done has gone, it's finished, and the fool will not be able to make repair in the world to come, so he'll be separated. But all of this confusion leads King Solomon to this apparent despair and cynicism. He begins to, in verse 17, he comes to hate life because of the apparent disorder that he perceives in this world, and these are themes that he will return to in the later sections of the book, the scroll of Kohelet, that he's going to specify in greater detail later on all of the wicked things that are under the sun, all leading him to hate all of his labor that he had pursued under the sun. He's going to leave it to the person that comes after him. Well, here in Targum on this verse, he amplifies the thought. I hated all my labor that I had labored under the sun in this world, because I'm going to leave it to Rechavam, my son, that will come after me, and along will come his servant Jeroboam, Yeravam, and he'll take from his hands 10 tribes, and they will inherit half the kingdom. And continuing Targum on these verses, Umin Yoda Achakim Yehei Otipesh, who knows if he will be wise or foolish? This king that is going to be after me, that will rule over all my efforts that I labored in this world, all that I repaired with my wisdom under the sun in this world, and I was astounded in my heart, and I went back, I said, look, it's all just vanity, continues Targum, paraphrasing the words of Solomon in the Hebrew text. And verse 20, I came and I despaired in my heart over all the efforts that I'd expended to acquire my acquisitions and to become wise, everything I tried to fix under the sun in this world, because as Solomon explains, going back to the Hebrew text in verse 21, because כי יש אדם שעמלו בחוכמה ודעת ובחשרון ולאדם שלא עמל לא יתננו חלקו גם זה הבל רבו. There's a person whose whole work is in wisdom, knowledge, understanding, and skill, and he goes and leaves it to the person that never labored for it. This is true not only in the realm of the spirit, also in discoverers in science and technology that brilliant scientists with the best of intentions may have revealed, but then come along evil people who take these inventions and use them to make weapons of war and destruction and other things that harm people. So continuing with Solomon's words as we come now towards the end of this chapter, what does a person gain from all this toil and the worry in his heart that he comes with his labor under the sun? All his days are pains, anger is his whole occupation. Come at night he cannot sleep. His heart does not rest at night. All of this is vanity. Here, Solomon's words very much are reminiscent of the complaints of Job. And as I do keep on returning to say, it seems to me that Solomon alone, through the emunah that is coming out from the amplifications of his words provided in Targum and the commentators, only Solomon has the answers of faith to the dilemmas and problems of Job, where it is indeed all constant suffering. And King Solomon concludes with what a person should do. Ein tov ba'odam sheyochal v'shoso v'heres nafsho tov ba'amoloi gam ze ro'isi ani ki miyad Elokim hu. An apparent, somewhat contradictory verse that could be misunderstood. It's best for a person just to eat and drink and show good to his soul through his labor. And even this, I saw, it's a gift from the hands of God if the person attains this. So to take a look at our commentaries on these last verses before we do conclude our session for today. On verse 21, Targum tells us that there is a person whose whole labor is in wisdom and understanding, and yet, although he dies in righteousness, he has no child, and everything he attained, he leaves to somebody that never labored for it. That should be his share. This is vanity. For what benefit does a person have with all of his labor and the efforts he expends, the breaking of his heart that he suffers under the sun in this world, because all of his days are pains and the attack of anger. Even at night, one can't sleep from the thoughts in the heart. This is all vanity. And now Targum on this concluding verse 24, then what should a person do? There's nothing better for a person than to eat and drink and show himself good in human society before the sons of men, to perform the commandments of God, to go in righteous ways before God, in order that he may benefit the person from the person's labor. But this too, this ability to exploit the opportunities of this world for mitzvot and ma'asim tovim, for spiritual gain, that's also a gift of God. I saw that a person who has success in this world in these above-mentioned ways, that's from the hand of God, who decrees how it should be. Concluding the Targum on these verses 25, for who is it that engages in the words of the Torah? And who is the man that has a anxiety about the day of judgment, the great day of judgment that's going to come about more than me? That is to say, Solomon is giving us these teachings on the basis of his profound searching in the words of the Torah, combined with his profound fear of God, which is a fear of God's judgment. Who more than me to be able to come and teach you? And concluding this whole section, says Targum, for the person whose deeds are straight and correct before the Lord, he gives him wisdom and understanding in this world and joy with the tzaddikim in the world to come. Whereas to the person that is a sinner, he gives an evil involvement, which is to try to gather in material wealth and to assemble great quantities of possessions in order for it all to be taken from him and all to be given to the person that is good in the eyes of the Lord. And all of this is vanity, and for the sinners it is the breaking of the spirit. So in conclusion of our session, we do see how time and time again King Solomon is just giving us the true wisdom of a life as is brought out in the Targum. And with the help of God, we will come in our coming session to chapter 3, the very beautiful section of the 28 times, looking at both in the light of our commentators and also in the light of Kabbalistic teachings about this coming section, about the 28 times. And with that, we conclude today's session, wishing you bracha and hatzlacha.